So welcome everybody for today's TCR update. My name is Brian Landor. I'm one of the account managers for the CCS portfolio, and I'm hopefully going to try and enlighten you around some of the impact of the targeted charging review, which has been instigated by Ofgem and Elexon over the last 3 or 4 years, which is finally coming to its final fruitions as of April 2023. What I'm hoping to be able to cover today, and you'll be enlightened again, is what are transmission and distribution costs? How have these charges been charged historically? What is and was the TCR? Why the need for change? What has changed or is changing? And what does it mean for me? So I've tried to start with hopefully a fairly simple slide here from left to right, to try and show you how your electricity reaches you from the point of generation, be that through a power station, or more commonly now through renewables, through solar farms or wind farms, and how that makes its way across the grid, either directly to consumers, which at the current state is a little unusual, direct to consumers, or more often than not through the national grid. Power is transmitted, as probably most of you will know, via generators and goes to our large UK national infrastructure in many ways, including overhead pylons and underground. It's during this transmission that national grid have to ensure that there is always enough power available to meet demand, both in terms of not having overcapacity and, equally as important, not having any undercapacity, so the lights go off, which is known in the industry as balancing. And with this, there is a cost associated with balancing mechanisms, which is this UOS, which is in the middle of your screen, which we'll come to in a moment. And then once the power has reached the large substations, if you like, the responsibility of the power is then passed over to the various local distribution network operators around the UK to manage its final route onwards direct to you and I as customers. Sounds simple, doesn't it? But it is a complex grid with many different factors that are going to affect it at given times, and how it gets to us as end users. Another way of looking at the same sort of diagram is that we've got the transmission network, which we often describe as what we call the large motorway of energy. This is the big wires, the pylons that you'll see often running down the sides of motorways across the countryside, providing the big generation, which will then go into the B roads, which is our local distribution network systems, which will then ultimately deliver it, as I said a moment ago, to the homes and businesses. And with that, you've got the balancing service user charge, which is the energy that generators produce, which must be matched against the amount of energy that consumers use on a second by second basis. So again, as I said a moment ago, that the lights do remain on at all times. Now, to manage the cost of the maintenance of the networks, historically there has been some charging, which some of you will or will not be familiar with, depending on how much industry knowledge you have. And basically, the distribution network operators, or DNOs, as we will refer to them maybe from now, we're recovering all their operational costs by levying times of day, or red, amber, green charges, which you may be familiar with, whilst also charging a daily fixed fee. This has allowed DNOs to then both maintain their local network, but also try and invest into future network development as demand for energy increases, as we are now moving towards a more electrified state of affairs. And transmission costs have been recovered largely, but not solely to be fair, but largely by commercial and industry users via the process of triad management and peak demand points during the winter months. For guidance, this particular period for triad management would cover from the 1st of November to the February the 28th or 29th each winter. And National Grid would identify the 3 highest peak demand points in that given time, all having to be split by a minimum of 10 days apart. Once they've identified these points in peak demand, they then apply the customer's charges based on your and our actual usage at these 3 particular times. It is worth pointing out, however, that these periods are not known in advance and are flexible and are largely dependent on the UK weather when they occur, as historically peak demand has usually occurred on our UK's coldest afternoons and early evenings, just as we as consumers start to ramp up usage between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. So why change? Well, principally, TCR has a really clear purpose. If you're connected to the network, you'll pay a fair contribution for its upkeep, or you should do. In reality, what has been happening, and this is through no fault of any customer, is the actual charging signals that the network companies were sending, asking people to rightfully reduce their usage at peak periods to reduce demand, so they wouldn't have to overinvest in more cabling. Well, that signal has become increasingly higher and higher. When the network companies have needed money to build up the network, those signals or charges have become higher, and it's now become so high that the cost of these signals and the cost of charges for the transmission was being avoided by certain consumers, which was running into the hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds. In the future, it could well have got to billions of pounds. The issue with all of this is that network charges are a zero-sum game. Somebody's got to pay for them. So if a certain part of our business community or domestic communities are not paying for that cost, those charges still have to be applied, but over a smaller base. In effect, other users might have picked up the slack. The targeting charging review is simply a way to introduce a kind of fixed cost to say, do you know what? If you are connected to the network, you should be paying a proportion for the upkeep based on the size and consumption of your site. So how and when is this review going to happen? Well, some of it's already happened. It's been implemented in 3 stages. We've already had the changes to distribution charges. This occurred last April when DNOs moved from a less residual charging mechanism, which is a time of day bandings, to charges becoming more fixed. So that as a portion of your bill, you will now see more and more collected through your standing charge or a fixed daily charge. It doesn't necessarily be your standing charge, depending on your setup of your price point, which will come to towards the end of the presentation, and less through the red, amber and green units. Now, from the 1st of April this year, a similar thing is going to happen with transmission costing. So we're talking around 90% of the transmission bills will now become a fixed component of your invoicing, moving away from the traditional triad calculations. It is worth noting that in some geographic areas, namely the Midlands, South, East and South Wales, there is going to still remain a very small element of triad charges, but this is going to equate to less than 8%, and in some cases as low as 3%, depending on geographical boundaries. And also the final stage is the pursuers charges are going to be amended. Currently, 50% of your bill is collected by generators, and they will recover that by adding it basically onto the cost of the wholesale energy that they sell. And the other 50% of your balancing cost is added as a non-energy cost to all consumers through a component part of your bill. TCR has now said that generators will no longer have to levy this charge, and that all of the pursuers cost will be levied directly onto customers. So in essence, your balancing costs will double in rate. But fear not, because generators are no longer recovering that cost from us as consumers, they have been reducing their cost of the wholesale energy as of the 1st of April 2023. This should therefore create a parity where there should be no overall increase for customers, because the wholesale price will go down, matching the increase in their pursuers contribution. So the question is, what does it mean for me? What does it mean for us? Well, network charging needs to keep performing. to keep up to pace with the way people generate and consume electricity. As I said earlier, we've got more and more local generation coming to the network, so the demands of the network has changed, and you've probably already been aware of that from your own domestic situation and what's been in the news certainly over the last 12 months. And we're going to have many more electric vehicles on our system to service in the future. So the system needs to be capable of supporting any infrastructure changes. While this review moves us up a step forward, there is likely to be more reform happening in the future to ensure that we can meet any further targets that are needed to be able to support the energy. But bear in mind, and again, for those of that maybe familiar with the industry, these costs are not insignificant. They can add up and at some point may reach about a third of the total energy costs. So the message that Ofgem and the network operators are trying to send is that it's a large cost, but they want to make those costs fair and proportionate to all users. Now, you need to pay a base cost to connect to a reliable network. However, they will still be incentivizing you to a more appropriate level if you're able to shift your demand elsewhere, which is why in the south of the country, or south of England, if you like, Midlands down, there's still this small element of triads that can be in place. But also, if you can shift your volume from the traditional expensive times, red, amber, green, between 4 and 7 Monday to Friday, that will help with your costs. And as already mentioned, the final point here is that network charging is a zero-sum game. This TCR is not about trying to increase costs to the network. It's about giving security and future security to the network. So they need an amount of revenue that the companies will collect through price controls being set by Ofgem. There's a budget and it's set. So if they don't collect it for one community of customers, for example, as we have done before, large industrial, they'll have to collect it from smaller users or even domestic users or vice versa. There's no point in actually trying to get one community to pay more than any other needlessly. They just need to make sure everybody pays their fair share. So what this will see is that we'll see over the last 2 years, we'll see our pass-through charges, the red, amber, green times a day and the triads will reduce, but your standing charges and your fixed costs will increase. But one should balance the other to give certainty to you as a consumer and to DNOs and the national grid. Now, I'll try to give an example here of what distribution and transmission may look like for this year. So I've chosen an MPAN in the eastern side of England. And what's important to note here is the line loss factor, which effectively drives the costings for distribution and for transmission. So from here, we can see that this particular MPAN has got a 58 LLF. And I've taken from East Midlands charging statement an extract at the bottom left of the screen there of 058 and what the fixed charge is for this particular supply for this year, which is 208.58 pence. Now this LLF may be a little boring to hear, but this is classified within their charging statement of the DNO, so to cross-reference, is classed as a low voltage half-hourly supply. And that in turn means it will attract a daily charge of 331.55 pence per day as their charge for using the transmission network. And this, as you can see at the bottom there, will give a fixed daily distribution and transmission charge of £5.40.13 per day. Now this will be included in either your standing charge, which probably you and I would know as our standard charge on our domestic bills could go high, or for the more complex half-hourly sites where they're on a pass-through tariff, where they don't have the transmission or distribution costs included within the unit rate, these would then be itemised on a pass-through basis on any invoice that we produce. The good news is that we as your supplier will continue to manage all of these costs for you within your invoice, regardless of what price point you have selected. So there is nothing needed from customers. That's it from me. I'd just like to thank you for listening and coming along today.